Alright, in the last episode we saw Quine took apart the analytic-synthetic distinction and put positivism as a program into danger. Right, the positivists were really confident they could come up with this pure, scientific, logical language, and Quine tried to say, really, we have to move much more towards pragmatism and just not have that ideal of this logical language. He never published a direct sequel to his Two Dogmas essay, but he did speak on it a little further in an essay on what's called radical translation, and that's what we're going to get into. This was published in the 1960s, and we have to remember Chomsky's in the background. He tried to mount a counter-argument to Quine, and we'll get into that in detail later, but that's there in the background. So what's Quine's argument? Well, he says, let's imagine a very native tribe. An anthropologist works with this tribe, and they come across a rabbit, and one of the tribe's men, or tribeswoman, if you want to be progressive, says, Gavagai. And the anthropologist, being very naive, then thinks, well, Gavagai means rabbit in their language, and produces a dictionary where Gavagai equals rabbit. But then, of course, some problems arise. Now, we have to be very clear. Quine is not a skeptic. That's not the perspective he's pursuing. But it is very parallel, but they're not the same thing. So then we have questions. Well, does Gavagai really mean rabbit, or does it mean rabbit foot? Do they mean rabbit as a biological animal, or as a religious symbol? Do they mean the rabbit, or the rabbit head? And so on and so forth. Rabbit ears? You could keep going on and on and on. Like, what does Gavagai really mean? Now, Quine is going to concede a lot. He says, obviously, if we keep studying the tribe, we're going to get a better idea, right? If they have a word for a group of apples, they may have a word for just one apple. So just observing them long enough, we're going to be able to differentiate a lot of their words. So again, a lot of the worries we might have about what do these sentences mean in their language are not real, right? We're going to be able to work through a lot of the positions. However, we're clearly going to come across many words that are very, very ambiguous, and we're kind of stuck. Like, well, what does this word mean in their language, and how do we translate it into our language? And his solution is just radical translation. We're just going to have to make a very, very big leap and just say, this is what we think the word means, and just very slowly maybe redefine it and readjust it as time goes on. And so again, it's a two dogmas argument, but now it's being spread out to kind of this foreign culture. And he goes even a little further, saying not just individual sentences or phrases, but perhaps even entire languages are in danger, right? Because we don't really have a center we could appeal back to. So when we really think through Quine, what is he really saying? What's the punchline? It's really this kind of anti-Platonist position, saying that we have this ideal that the positivists gave us in the early 20th century, that if we just have this logical language, we'll be able to sort of say once and for all, this is what this means, this is what that means. If you use the word incorrectly, we can say, you don't know what the word means, and we have a very confident stance, and we can sort of get rid of a lot of controversy that way. And Quine is just saying to us, that really, really doesn't make sense. So it's a little different from Derrida, whereas Derrida really puts the doubt into that meaning has any meaning itself at all, right? Meaning is just a metaphysical delusion. Quine is a little different. He says the problem is not that we don't have meaning, but that we have multiple meanings, right? Because we think, well, Gavagai should only mean one thing, one way, at one time. But we may run into situations where Gavagai or any other sentence or word can mean multiple things at the same time. So let's say Gavagai. Gavagai could mean the individual rabbit, but it could be that storms or rain gather when the rabbits come, right? They just associate rabbits with rainfall. So Gavagai means basically a storm warning. So we have here two meanings for Gavagai. It's a rabbit, but it's also a warning for storms. Now, philosophers worry about this, saying, well, what's the exact meaning? What does it exactly mean? How do we know when to use the words correctly? And Quine is just basically saying, this is getting ridiculous. There is no point in choosing in between. We're going to choose pragmatically. Sometimes one meaning makes more sense, sometimes the other meaning makes sense. And again, we are going to have cases where both meanings may apply, and we just have to make a decision. And this, again, is going to have very radical implications because, as odd as it may seem, this is actually where we get social constructivism, feminism, and other critiques, because the critique is that, and not just with science, but the focus is usually on science, that scientists will give us the correct theory or the correct judgment because they're not biased, right? The reason we're going to decide on Einstein versus Newtonian physics is because Einsteinian physics is better. It makes more sense. It's more true. Quine is saying very radically, no, that's never really the case. The reason we choose a theory, the reason we choose a conclusion is based on something else than the evidence, right? If we see a storm and a rabbit, yes, obviously we appeal to evidence, right? The storm as well as the rabbit is going to push us to Gavagai. But that's really not why we choose it. Why we choose, to use the word Gavagai in that situation may depend on a multiple set of factors. It may be gender, it may be race, it may be class, it may be you're just biased, it may be you have a financial interest in saying Gavagai. There's never a pure reason you're going to use this word, this phrase, or this theory. You're always using something more beyond the evidence. Something else is going to be at work because pragmatically as human beings, right, multiple factors are at work. It's never one pure thing. So now it's going on way beyond even positivism. Now it seems that even scientific rationality is in doubt. But again, Quine thinks there's nothing to worry about because this was always the case. When we do science or philosophy, we're using everything together. We're never using just our pure rationality. We're using our feelings, perceptions, intuitions, as well as our rationality. So we don't have to give up on logic, but we have to realize that logic works with this larger cultural system, and as human beings, we can't get out of that, right? There's no real gap between theory and observation. We're always theorizing and we're always observing, and we just have to realize that's how we work, and that's how the world really does work with us, and not panic. We don't have to worry because once we give up on Platonism, we'll just pragmatically make these decisions on a case-by-case basis. So this opens up a lot of difficulties and a lot of questions, and we're going to get into that by looking at the Chomsky program and how it responds and some of the responses. All right, this has been Philosophy Analyzed on Radical Translation. Thanks for listening. Please comment below. Please hit the like button if you can. Thanks again.